My name is Gabrielle Hemesath. I'm the 2015 American Honey Queen. My job is to travel the country and teach people about bees. So I'm from Iowa. Last year I was the Iowa Honey Queen, and I just traveled the state. Then in January I went to California and competed against the other state queens. It's a competition based off our writing skills, speaking skills, and knowledge of honeybees. So it's very much like a giant test. And I became the American Honey Queen. Back home, I work for a commercial beekeeper. We run 2,000 hives, and this is my first time away from the bees in 7 years that I won't be taking care of them this summer, so my bees have a babysitter. So I know a lot about bees, so I hope that you'll trust me to answer your questions. I hope I'll have a few minutes at the end for questions, but if not, if I run out of time, I'll be right outside the door, so you can come and talk to me there, or I have a booth over in the local roots section. Come talk to me and about anything. So to get you interested, I have a little clip of my bees working. My hives are named Brooklyn and the Bronx. This is Brooklyn. I love New York, but Queens was too cheesy. My house looks like on a daily basis. So what are honeybees? Honeybees are six-legged insects that we keep in the United States and all over the world to help pollinate our food and make us honey. But beyond that, there are 3 types of honeybees in the hive. And the first is a worker bee. Worker bees are the females, and they do everything. Exactly. So they live to be about 4 to 6 weeks old, and just like a kid learns how to ride a tricycle before they can learn how to ride a bike, the worker bees have to learn how to do easier jobs before they can learn how to do the harder jobs. So during the first 3 weeks, they're in the hive working on simple things like cleaning, taking care of the young bees, taking care of the queen, transforming nectar into honey, and other jobs like that. During the last 3 weeks of their life, they get to be a forager bee, which means they leave the hive to collect nectar. It's a dangerous job because there are a lot more things outside of the hive that could hurt them than inside the hive, and also flying through the grass and weeds is really hard on their wings. So after about 6 weeks, the honeybees work themselves to death. So that is how a honeybee goes. So these are the worker bees. That's a little fuzzy girl on a flower. They have 3 parts to their body because they're insects. You have the head on the front, which is where they get all their sensory input. Honeybees actually have 5 eyes, 2 compound and 3 simple. The middle part is the thorax. Attached to it are 4 wings and 6 legs. And the back segment is the abdomen, where they keep all of their important organs. So the next type of bee is called a drone, and the drones are the male bees. Their only job is to mate with the queen. But the queen only mates once in her lifetime and lives to be about 3 years old. So the vast majority of drones never do anything. Now, these drones, when the queen does mate, she'll mate with about 10 to 15 drones, and they all die because they lose their reproductive organs and fall out of the sky to their doom. And the queen stores that sperm. She stores it in her body for the rest of her life, so she can keep laying eggs. So the drones can live to be about several months old because they don't have to do all the work that the worker bee does. But there's a catch. After mating season is over and the worker bees realize that they don't need the drones anymore, they kick all of them out of the hive. And drones don't have stingers, they can't make their own food, so all of the drones die of starvation and exposure. So you can be a worker bee and work till you die, or you can be a drone and potentially get kicked out of the hive. So up there I do have a picture of a drone mating with the queen. They do mate in flight. And that's very important because genetic diversity is huge for honeybees, so we need really good drones. So a lot of people nag on the drones for not helping much, but their one small role is huge. This is the type of the bee that everyone seems to know of. I am the American honey queen, but a lot of people call me the queen bee. And they can live to be about 3 to 5 years old. They have 2 jobs. The first is to lay eggs, and they can lay up to 2,000 eggs a day during the height of summer. They are the mama bee. Now, their second job is to spread chemical scents called pheromones throughout the hive to tell everyone that the hive is okay. If the worker bees cannot smell their queen, they become very upset very quickly. They need her. So a worker bee or a queen bee will be surrounded by 5 to 6 workers almost at all times that are there to groom her, take care of her, but also to rub up against her and get her scent on their own bodies and then spread it throughout the hive so everyone can always smell the queen. It's very important. So honeybees make honey. First, they send out scout bees in the morning to look for a location of where they could find honey. So they want a really big field of clover or orange blossom in Florida, star thistle in Michigan, anything like that. And when the scouts come back, they do a dance to show all the other bees where to go. So they have to have really specific instructions. And how this dance goes, it's called the waggle dance. How far forward they walk is how far away the food source is. So if it's a couple steps forward, it could be right outside the hive. If they walk an inch forward, it could be up to 3 miles away. The direction they walk tells the direction according to the sun that the bees need to fly. And how fast they shake while they do the dance says how good of a food source it is. So they're shaking a little bit. It's not that great. It's a few dandelions separated. But if they shake really fast, it's a big bloom of something amazing, which could be dandelions. So they walk forward shaking, and they walk back around to their starting point, and they walk forward shaking, and they walk back around to their starting point. And these very specific directions tell all the rest of the bees where to go. So as you can see a bee do this, I have a short clip of a bee doing it, and it's set to rag music because I can. That were bumping up against that bee and looking, they're gaining that information, so they're going to keep watching the dance until they can say, yeah, I got it, I know where to go, and then they'll take off in flight and look for that food source. So once they find the source of food, they land on the flower and use their hollow tongue called a proboscis to suck nectar up into their honey stomach. Now what you need to know is that a honey stomach is nothing like your stomach. It's just a special area in the bee used to store nectar. They have a completely different stomach to digest their food. So you can think of it as an internal canteen. They'll also pack pollen onto their back legs. They have really dense furs on those back legs called a pollen basket, so they can take that home. And why they're doing this is because they use the nectar to make honey, which is their source of sugar and carbs, and the protein, or the pollen, is the source of their protein. So they're actually just collecting their food. Once the honeybee is full of nectar and pollen, she flies home and meets up with her little sister, because the older bees do the dangerous job of collecting the nectar, but the younger bees get to transform it into the honey. So use their hollow tongues to transfer the nectar into her younger sister's honey stomach. Then her younger sister mixes it with enzymes to transform it into honey and packs it in those little cells beneath their feet. At this point, the honey is very liquidy. It's not like the thick honey you see in stores, so the bees have to fan their wings really quickly to evaporate the extra water and transform it into honey. Once it's done, they cover it with wax to seal it in. So on the left side, That's honey that's been sealed in. It looks kind of white. And they actually make this wax themselves in glands in their abdomen. And on the right side is the honey that hasn't been covered yet. There's also a queen up there with a red dot. We put that red dot on so you could see her. I took this picture in Arizona last week. It just happened to be what I had, so you get to see a queen too. So once honey's been made, it never goes old. Researchers found honey in King Tut's tomb that was still edible despite thousands of years beneath the sand. Has anyone ever seen honey that's kind of white or sugary looking? A lot of people think that you should throw it out when that happens, but it actually hasn't gone bad. That's just a natural aging process. If you put that honey in some warm water, it will turn right back into liquid. So don't throw out your honey. It's good forever, and it can be used for a lot of different things. The first is cooking and baking. So honey is great for recipes because there are 300 different kinds of honey in the United States alone. Just like an apple tastes different than an orange, the honey made from an apple tree tastes different than the honey made from an orange tree. So you can change your recipes just by using different flavors. And they vary from being almost a clear honey to a dark brown. So vastly different and vastly different flavors. Worldwide, there are 3,000 different types of honey. So I encourage you to try it out. You can also use it for medical purposes. If you have a small scrape or burn, you can put some honey in it to help heal it. Honey is antibacterial, so it will keep your cut from getting infected. It will also keep your skin smooth while it heals. And it's great for pets and kids because you might not want to put a medicine on your pet, but if you put some honey on your pet and it happens to lick it up, it's no harm done. You can also use it in cosmetics. I use honey to wash my face. It's full of vitamins and minerals. Again, keeps your skin smooth. Rumor has it that Cleopatra bathed in honey and goat's milk. So keep it from her. She knew it was up. Honeybees make us honey, but also they pollinate our food, which is very important. 1/3 of our food in the United States comes from honeybee pollination, which is worth about $19 billion every year. So that's things like apples and oranges, all kinds of fruits and vegetables. But you can also connect it to the meat industry because honeybees pollinate alfalfa. Cows eat alfalfa, which gets our beef. You can do it with a lot of other plants and animals as well, which means you can also connect it to ice cream. Everybody loves ice cream, and honeybees help make that. Now, another thing honeybees help us make is our clothes because they pollinate cotton. So you can't get dressed without honeybee help. And a lot of insects are pollinators, so I encourage you to be aware and appreciate our insects. But honeybees are especially great pollinators for a couple different reasons. The first is their body structure. Honeybees are very fuzzy creatures, so when they land on a flower, that pollen gets stuck all over their bodies, which is great for moving pollen because you have to have the pollen to move it to the next flower, and it's stuck all over them, so they're going to do it whether they want to or not. Another reason that honeybees are great at pollination is because they overwinter. So a lot of insects, take bumblebees for instance, when they go into hibernation, just the queen lives through the winter. She hibernates in a hole in the ground, and when spring happens, the queen first has to build up her home with worker bees before they can start doing a lot of work, so it takes them a little longer. Now, honeybees do not hibernate. They stay in the hive with thousands of worker bees clustered around the queen, keeping her warm by eating honey for energy and flexing and unflexing their flight muscles to create heat. When it starts to warm up, and we need pollinators, honeybees already have a really large force to go out and pollinate. So they're ready as soon as spring hits. But the greatest reason that honeybees are good at pollinating is because they're flower specific, and that's connected to the dance. When a honeybee starts collecting pollen and nectar from an orange tree, she'll keep going back to orange trees for the rest of the day. And since you can't pollinate an apple tree with an orange tree, it's great that they'll keep going to the same type of flower source. Other insects, most of them, will go to any nectar-producing plant throughout the day. They're not going to stick on the same one. And most of the hive will actually go to the same nectar source because they were told by the scouts to go there. Beekeeping in the United States, this is a picture of me in Arizona. So the funny thing is this is the second time ever that I had worn a bee suit to actually work with bees in the 7 years that I've been beekeeping. And that's because bees in Iowa and Michigan are actually very gentle. They only sting if they feel like they must. I'm going to touch on that a little bit later too. But in Arizona and southern states, they have a little more Africanized honeybees, which are more protective of their habitat. But what I found that day is that Africanized honeybees are not nearly as bad as they've been made out to be. So when I was told to suit up to keep bees, I was, a little cautious, but they were pretty easygoing. So beekeeping in the United States, we have about 2.6 million colonies in the United States, and on average they produce about 56.6 pounds of honey. Bees, and that's excess. Bees can produce more than that, but sometimes less. Now my 2 hives produced 189 pounds of excess honey last year, so quite a bit. And I just put that in bottles and sold it locally. So if you decide to keep bees, you can actually make a small business out of it, maybe come to the Maker Faire with a honey booth and sell it. So almost 150 million pounds of honey produced in the United States. This is per year. So I thought I'd throw up Michigan because this is where I am, so you can see how you compare. You have 91,000 colonies, and you average 63 pounds of honey per hive. So you're actually above the average, and over 5.7 million pounds of honey a year produced. If you can imagine that, because each honeybee only makes 1/12 a teaspoon of honey in its entire lifetime. So to produce 5.7 million pounds of honey is pretty amazing. So I promised you I would touch on stings. Honeybees sting to protect their home, and if they sting, they do die, because a honeybee has a small barb on the end of the stinger, and when it stings, the barb gets stuck in whatever it stung, and when it tries to fly away, its stinger gets pulled out along with its organs and intestines. So they cannot live after they sting. So when a honeybee is thinking about stinging, what I found personally is that my bees will bump up against me a few times, telling me that I need to leave if I'm working the hive. And if I do not take their advice and leave the hive, they will eventually sting. But I can keep working in my hive for 5 or 10 minutes after they start bumping up against me before they'll actually do anything about it. So they're very gentle by nature, and they do not want to sting. So I have a video that was made by the 2012 American Honey Princess, and I clipped it up so it's a little faster, but it's going to show you what the stinger looks like, because we're going to make this honeybee sting, and it does not want to. And then you can see on the end of the stinger there's a little venom sac. And that venom sac will keep pumping for up to an hour or so after you're stung if you don't take the stinger out. So if you do get stung, what you want to do is use your fingernail to scrape out the stinger. Don't squeeze, because that'll push the venom in. Scrape it out, and that's all going to be demonstrated, which I think I also set to fun music, because I can. It did not, it wasn't stinging. We're going to pull it out, intestines. And you can see that sac is still pumping. It's going to keep pumping venom. If you're a royalty's father, these are the things you get into. To get stung for cameras. Then we're going to show you how to scrape it out in a second. And it'll actually keep pumping after you scrape it out. So I'm not trying to scare you with the bee sting, but I think it is important to know that they can sting. So even though they are friendly and they pollinate so much of our food, you still need to respect their space. If a honeybee is flying near you and you stay still and don't swat at it, there is a very small chance that it will sting. If you swat, it thinks you're trying to kill it, and then it will be a little more defensive of its home. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to also talk about beekeeping equipment, because beekeepers work with so many honeybees. I mean, we have 2,000 hives, so I see several million bees on a daily basis, and we do have equipment. Now again, I've never worn a bee suit in Iowa before. I work my bees in shorts and a t-shirt typically, and they're just fine, but bee suits can be used to make sure that you don't get stung. That thing is locked up tight. If you want to see a bee suit in person, I have one out at my booth at the local Roots. And that'll just protect you from any potential stings. This one actually is 3 layers of fabric just because I was wearing it in an Africanized zone and they can be a little more protective. But something else I wanted to talk about is a bee smoker. Has anyone seen the bee movie? So in the bee movie, the bees pass out when they're puffed with smoke, and that does not happen. There's a lot of things in the bee movie that I try to correct, but that is the biggest one because that's not how a smoker works at all. We use a smoker for 2 reasons. The first is connected again to pheromones. The queen has a pheromone to tell everyone that everything is okay. But the worker bees have a pheromone called the alarm pheromone to tell all the other bees that everything is not okay. And when I open the lid of my hives, the worker bees might think that I'm trying to hurt them since I just took the roof off of their home. So they might let off this alarm pheromone to tell the other bees that it's time to protect the hive. So if you put smoke over them, it covers up the smell of the alarm pheromone. If they can't smell that alarm pheromone, they don't know that something is wrong and they'll stay calm. The second reason we use a smoker is because it makes the bees think their hive is on fire. So they might think they have to go into their house and collect honey because they want to leave, but they don't want to leave empty-handed, just like some people might do, but you should always get out of a house if it's on fire. So I'm going to have a little video that I made for YouTube about this. We have a lot of YouTube videos for the Queen program. Just to reiterate how a smoker works with pictures. Again with fun music.
And thanks for watching. My name is Gabrielle Hemesath, and I'm the 2015 American Honey Queen. Today's video is all about honeybee smokers. Smokers are used by beekeepers to keep the bees calm, and they do not hurt the bees in any way. Smokers can be lit using a variety of things. I'm going to light my smoker using straw and wood chips. First, straw is lit and placed in the chamber. Remember, children should never attempt to light a smoker without a beekeeper's supervision. Once the straw is smoking, wood chips can be added. Once the smoker has been lit, it's ready to use. Here's how the smoker works. The back part of the smoker is called the bellows. As the bellows are pumped, air is pushed through the chamber of the smoker and up through the lit fuel. This causes smoke to come out the nozzle. Beekeepers use smokers for 2 different reasons. The first is connected to chemical scents called pheromones. Honeybees use pheromones to communicate a variety of things. One pheromone, called the alarm pheromone, is used by worker bees to tell other worker bees when something is wrong. When beekeepers open the lid of the hive, the bees may think the beekeeper is trying to hurt them and let off the alarm pheromone to tell all the other workers to protect the hive. When a beekeeper puts smoke over the bees, it covers up the scent of the alarm pheromone and keeps them calm. The second reason we use a smoker is because it makes the bees think their hive is on fire. The honeybees think they're going to have to leave the hive, but they don't want to leave empty-handed, so they fill their stomachs up with as much honey as they can possibly hold. However, this honey has the same effect as eating a large meal would have on a human. It slows the bees down and keeps them from stinging.
So the hive I used for that video is actually the Bronx, which is the more aggressive of my 2 hives. And it was still very gentle. So you can see that they're pretty easygoing to work with. So now I have about 5 minutes for questions, and then I'll be outside the doors if you have any more questions. Yes? How come honeybees are dying? We have had about 30 to 40% losses in the United States on a consistent basis, and that's for a lot of different reasons. The first is pesticides and pests. So we use a lot of chemicals in the United States to grow our food, and we do need some pesticides to be able to feed ourselves and export food, but we need to take a closer look at why we're using them and only use the ones we have to instead of throwing chemicals on the field for something that might happen. And then pests, there's a bug called a varroa mite. It feeds on the blood of honeybees, and it transmits diseases and viruses, which is why there aren't very many feral honeybees. Beekeepers treat their bees for this varroa mite, and it's very difficult to take care of the varroa mite, but if the bees are in the care of a beekeeper, they have a better chance. We also have issues with habitat loss, which is something I'm focusing on at my booth. Honeybees have to visit 2 million flowers to make just 1 pound of honey. And we have a habit of replacing all of our flowers with like buildings and fields and things. So at my booth, we're making seed bombs so you can plant flowers for the honeybees. And in states like this, winter weather can also be a big deal. Just keeping the honeybees warm enough with enough food throughout the winter can be difficult. Yes?
How does a bee become a queen?
How does a bee become a queen? This is one of my favorite questions. Any female egg can either be a worker bee or a queen bee. It's the exact same egg. The only difference is the type of food that egg is fed when it's in a larval state. If it's going to become a worker bee, the nurse bees taking care of that young larva will feed it honey and pollen. If that larva is going to become a queen, they'll feed the larva royal jelly, which is a creamy white substance the nurse bees make in glands in their head. And nurse bees is just a special type of worker bee. So when the bees make a new queen, they want to make sure they get a new queen because they're making one because their old queen is either too old or died or is going to die. So they'll make 3 to up to, I've seen 20 new queens in a hive, and whichever one emerges from their cell as an adult first after 16 days kills the other potential queens and takes over the hive. Yes?
So
How do you become a beekeeper? The first thing I recommend is reading about it so you know what you're getting into, because bees are just like any other livestock. You wouldn't buy a cow and then ask, well, now what do I do with it? So I suggest reading. A really good book is Beekeeping for Dummies. It walks you through the year and kind of how to go. And then a book I like just for extra information is The Beekeeper's Bible. So you read about it and then try to take a beekeeping class. If you look it up online, there are usually classes pretty spread out throughout the country since it's an uprising hobby. Then anywhere from about, you could go as cheap as $400 to $500 to $1,000 for all of your hive equipment, your smoker, your gear. Most of these things are one-time costs, and then you can sell your honey to kind of make back that. Some reoccurring costs you're going to have is some kind of medication for the varroa mites, and then if you run over your smoker with a truck, there's no coming back from that. So you got to get a new one. Yes?
How can you tell the difference between surplus honey and honey they need to survive the winter?
Okay, how can you tell the difference between surplus honey and honey that they need? So a lot of this is just the weight thing. Where I work, we have a 75 to 100 pounds is how much we want our hives to weigh going into the winter. I'm going to guess Michigan will be about the same that you'll want that. So one, you could weigh your hive. We train all of our workers to know how much weight that is. So anybody who works there can pick up a hive and know that either has enough honey or doesn't have enough. Typically, if you have 2 deep boxes and those are full of honey, if you saw in the video, we put more boxes on top. Those top boxes are the excess honey. So we're going to take that off and extract it to get it into bottles. Those bottom 2 thick boxes are called the brood chamber. It's where they keep their young bees and their honey that they'll need throughout the winter. Then it's important, if you're a beekeeper, to go out maybe once or twice in the winter, feel your hive, and if it feels light, you might have to supplemental feed it, which can be things like sugar or pollen patties. Yes? So queen excluders are a metal grate that you can put on top of your brood chamber so they don't lay any eggs in the upper boxes. It's just honey. Where I work, we don't use queen excluders. They take too much time, and my boss thinks that they make the bees make less honey because it takes more time for them to move back and forth between that. So personally, I don't. I know a lot of people who do and are successful with it. So that's more of a personal choice. Yes?
When the bees winter over, and some have a lifespan, what's the lifespan of just months?
So when bees overwinter, worker bees live to be about 5 to 6 weeks because gathering honey is so labor intensive.
Right.
The worker bees that go into the winter, the younger ones can live through the whole winter, so like 3 months long, and then help make the young bees come spring.
So it's short lifespans related to work.
Yes.
So I was wondering, because what happens to all the dead bees?
During the winter?
Yeah.
They will fly out of the hive to die, typically if they need to, or there are actually undertaker bees. Their job is just to remove dead bees from the hive.
Really?
Okay, I can take one more question, and then I'll take questions out the doors. Yes? Is there bee years? There's no classification of bee years. They just typically live to be about 5 to 6 weeks old. It's a good question. I haven't had that. Well, thank you for being a great audience, and I'll be right outside. Oh.